howdy of you delicious people. I could really taste the Loki in this episode. It was 100% of the taste of Loki and 0% of my interest. Man, if only you could understand like some of the goofy things that they have to talk about in this episode. The only benefiting thing of realistically this episode is we get a little bit more backstory of this new female Loki, which is Sylvie, and which every time I heard it, it sounded like Sophie to me, but it was Sylvie. And so Loki also gets to tell us a little bit about his mother's backstory and a little bit about his past. But that's the only part of this episode that holds any interest. So we are now to be in some timeline of 2077. I'm like, oh my god, we're so close to making our way to 2020 or 2099. Like, oh my god, we're so there. It's just 22 years away. We need to get to 2099. If this show does not cover the timeline of 2099, I will be furious. I will just be like, God, this show is a waste. A complete waste. If they don't cover an episode with 2099. They need to do so. Desperately. Because at least it'll actually be something I could bear to just be interested in watching. Because this episode did not do that for me. So, here's some goofy things that they do in this episode that held no importance whatsoever. So, have you ever wanted to go into a Marvel show and have them describe to you what a brain freeze is? Has anybody ever wanted to contemplate what love is an entire episode? Has anybody ever wanted to hear Loki sing in an episode? Well, they do all that and more in this episode. What more? I don't even care what more it does. If anything, there's this like cool neon city in this episode, but that doesn't last very long. But other than that, like, there is nothing going on in this episode. Really, a lot of it is just pure boredom. It's just like, man, these writers are the laziest sons of is. Like, man, I could watch a Batwoman episode and I could feel better about watching that than I could this. Because I'm like, God, this goes nowhere. And the last two episodes hasn't gotten me to like go, I got something out of this. I got 100% disinterest in Loki and 0% of me wanting to continue on going to another episode. But I feel like I have to because eventually I'm just going to finally get a good episode that I'm going to like. And then I'll be like, yeah, this made up for all this garbage that I had to watch before. Because eventually that did happen even in WandaVision, where I hated most of that show. But then eventually it got to one episode where I'm like, yeah, like this one episode kind of technically made up for all the garbage that I was watching before. And I hope that happens somewhere in this Loki show. I guess we're not going to go and take the time to have Loki be getting a Guardians of the Galaxy team in this movie. Because if that would have happened, that would have happened by now. And so we're just going to go through this boring, arduous process of a story where Loki is just time jumping through spots, and I don't understand what is the point of any of this. Maybe any number of any of these situations could actually lead for this to be showcased in a future Marvel thing, to where eventually we'll have to blueprint our way back to this show to just be like, oh, hey, yeah, like, so this is the reason why this show was put together, because eventually they're putting this future thing as a, like, maybe they're going to have Ant-Man, like, jump through time or something, and eventually they're going to reference a lot of the Loki stuff. And so maybe there's a reason why we had to watch all of this, but if not, then So, I think it's that coveted time to go into spoilers about this show. I'm going to try as lightning quick as possible to try to get through this review because there's nothing. There's nothing in this episode. Yeah, like, if anything, this whole entire episode could have been easily clipped to just, like, get to the point to where Loki and the other Loki are on the train. And, like, at least you'll get some backstory with the female Loki. So basically you can skip everything that happens before and everything that happens after that. Just basically wait till both Loki and female Loki are on train and then hit play. You'll have to go through a lot of arduous processes of hearing some garbagey stuff. But after that, or in between that, like, eventually it's just garbage after that. So I think it's about that coveted time to go into spoiler territory, and so let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I get to spoil this episode. So, really tailoring back to the last episode where female Loki had went through Orange Door, and Loki was like, maybe I should go through this Orange Door too. And Mobius is like, no, I need to also go through Orange Door. But then Loki went through Orange Door, and Mobius could not go through Orange Door in a Quantum Leap-like fashion because the door closed. So, Loki and Sylvia, or Sylvie, are to be in time period of 2077, where it seems like this world is eventually going to go to crap. So Loki and Sylvie are to be like a buddy cop in this episode, because it seems that eventually they start fighting one another, but then they realize that they're just kind of stuck together in this time period because Loki is to have the the little gadget for them to go to any other timeline. And so Loki is to find this home of this old woman and with Sylvie, and so Loki is to appear to this woman as her husband, but this woman shoots Loki anyways because she doesn't believe that this guy is who it is. So eventually Loki and Sylvie is to talk to this woman and just be like, what the heck is going on here? As comments are starting to fall onto, I think, this moon-esh-like spot. So this woman is to tell these people that, like, well, hey, like, everybody is getting on this ark and trying to leave this place. And they're like, Ark? And it's like, yeah, like, it's kind of like Noah's Ark. It's like they're basically evacuating this place to eventually go to somewhere else that could be much more protective. Sylvie is to eventually tell us in this episode that the Ark never actually makes it from off of this, like, spot, and so everyone is to die. So, but Loki and Sylvie are to think, well, hey, like, if anything, if we go on this Ark ourselves, then maybe we'll have enough power for this device, because evidently they're, like, it's kind of like the Back to the Future, like them, like, missing the plutonium from the other Back to the Future movie, where Doc Brown has to come up with a consensus, is like, well, considering you don't have plutonium handy, then, like, the power that you're going to need is from, like, a bolt of lightning. And Marty's like, what? And he's like, a bolt of lightning! And so, like, it's kind of like that, where they're kind of trying to go into the situation of coming up with some kind of power that will charge up this this gadget that they have with them from the TVA. Also, like, I guess TVA and Minuteman, I guess there is no real true difference. But I made it a difference in the other review, like, because it doesn't really matter. But in the very beginning of this episode, we have Sylvie, female Loki. Even though she hates to consistently be called Loki, I guess, to drastically make the difference between both the Lokis, because this guy is just going to be called Loki, and so she has to be called something different. So, Sylvie is to talk with Hunter C20 that we saw in the last episode that was giving her the information about where the timekeepers are. And so Sylvie is talking to Hunter C20, and they're at this diner together. And so this girl is consistently having this brain freeze. And now Sylvie has to explain what a brain freeze is to her. And man, is that exciting. And so also, this girl is to consistently get a brain freeze and try to explain to Sylvie where the timekeepers are. And so I guess eventually she is to tell us, or eventually Hunter C20 eventually tells Sylvie where the timekeepers are. So that's a important part of this show, I guess. So, which, like, we'll probably forget about it and we'll be like, oh yeah, that's what the whole episode before will be in the next episode. Or on the very last episode, and then we'll remember, oh yeah, like, we now have to re-reference what happened in this episode to understand another episode, because I don't think it'll actually get there until the very end of this. So, because I think they're going to milk the crap out of this show. So Loki and Loki are to realize that they are to go on the Ark. The Indiana Jones thing of this is that sadly they can't just appear a ticket in their hands. So Loki has to use his power to appear as one of the guards that is to go on this train, and like they're pulling the Star Wars like stormtrooper disguising thing to have them get onto the Ark. But it seems that the guard that is in front of the Ark, like, just won't easily let them in if this guy is just masquerading as one of them. And so, female Loki goes and touches guard to manipulate him into letting them back on. Here's the goofy thing about that. Even though they're going to get onto the train, they're not going to easily be able to stay there, because eventually all the manipulating in the world won't fix the fact that they'll still need a ticket at some point during their travels. So Loki and duo Lokis are to make it onto this train, and so once they are to make it on the train, that's where the interesting dialogue actually happens in this episode. Really just having Loki tell Sylvie that he was adopted and Loki didn't know about it, but Sylvie did. She knew that she was adopted. Her parents actually told her. Loki actually got to spend some time with his mother, and Sylvie didn't. Loki has a string of dialogue about him having his mother do magic for him, shoot off fireworks and turn flowers into frogs and stuff like that. And eventually Loki ends up like having fireworks come out of his hand to show how like magical he could be. So Loki is asking Sylvie if there's anybody waiting for her, like, after this whole thing is over, like a husband or somebody after, or somebody for her after this whole thing is done. And I don't think there was a clear consensus of that. Like, to me, it doesn't feel like, it kind of feels very vague. And Loki was like, well, like, I don't think there's anybody really for me either. So, aka, when is the Enchantress going to come in here? Because I'm assuming that maybe this is going to be an Agatha all along situation, where actually this female Loki is going to be Enchantress, and then we're going to be like, oh my god, this is Enchantress? Oh my god, that's amazing. Because wouldn't that make a really cool amount of sense to have this, like, real person be Enchantress all along? That would be kind of cool. But anyways, so eventually Loki goes up and starts singing this Lord of the Rings sounding like song, and I'm like, oh great. So this is kind of probably one of the songs of which that was some kind of Norse god song thing, which I'm from a northern state, so yippee for that. The song doesn't sound familiar to me, so I'm just like, meh, like, okay. Uh, like, I'm of course from Minnesota, so Minnesota Vikings and stuff, so we know a little bit about North stuff here, but really it's just like, it's like we're not like all knowledgeable about Norse mythology or whatever. I've done probably enough like shows and stuff about it, like American Gods, if people don't know about that. But anyways, that's on Stars, but I know there's a coveted way to watch that without going into Stars. So go ahead and check it out. It has an actual. It has like leprechauns and all kinds of things, but I don't think it actually. Well, no, I think it actually has. Maybe it has a Loki in there. I don't know. It has an Odin and it has a. Oh, I can't get into that because that might spoil the show. But it has a bunch of gods in it. It might not all be Norse gods because it goes into like Jesus and all kinds of things. But mood point, because that's how exciting this show was. I'm talking about other things. So eventually we get into the Indiana Jones moment of this show. And so the guards are to come up to Loki and other Loki and say, hey, you guys need to give us a ticket. And so Loki tries to come up with one, but he comes up with fireworks instead. But then he's like, well, hey, like, didn't that look cool? And so eventually these people are to forcibly fight it out. And so really that lands with both Lokis going and being shot out of this arc. And so now both Lokis need to try and get back on the ark because they seem to find that to be the only safe way out of here. And because Loki, like, that's like, if I say female Loki, then you'll know the difference. But so Loki is to eventually take out of his pocket the device that was supposed to get them the heck out of there, and it is now broken. So really they're trying to figure out what is the best way for them to survive off of this timeline. And supposedly originally the Ark never made it off of this this moon to get out of here safely. So that seems to be what is their plan. So Loki and other Loki are walking their way to this spot, and Loki is is mentioning to Sylvie that like trying to ask her how exactly she does the magic that she is, because Loki is wanting her to just kind of take control of him, so that way he can just sleep while just forcibly walking to the location that they're needing to do. Because if anything, after watching this show, it might be a snooze fest for some people. So, so Sylvie is to mention how exactly her powers work, and so we can now understand that maybe at some point Loki will be able to harness that same power. So Loki and Loki all decide to go on to this neon city, and while they are at this neon city, it seems like Loki is seeing that they're not wanting anybody to get on to this arc, and plus all of a sudden this neon city is starting to crumble and fall, and so Loki and other Loki are rushing around the city trying to get back on the Ark and finding a safe spot to get the heck out of here because this city is completely falling apart. And eventually that's just how this episode ends, with just them just running off to try and get out of this neon city that actually looks pretty cool, but considering it's going to be destroyed, it's kind of pointless. So it's either that Mobius is probably going to find both Lokis and eventually bring them back, or like maybe there's going to be coincidentally another TVA agent that is to pop up somehow, and maybe that will help get these Lokis out of here by maybe commandeering someone's device or something. Who knows? But with that said, that's all I got for this episode. And really, like, there was that moment in the train where they were to consistently mention what love is. Like, Sylvie was to mention that love is hate, and Loki is to mention that love is a dagger that eventually once you try to pull it out, you're just to get bloody. Once you're to like grab onto it, like you realize that it's not really there, that it's imaginary and all this other garbage. But I kind of like a bit of that dialogue, even though I don't really understand where exactly it's all heading with the conversation between them. Of like, but anyways, so we get the only kind of real conversation that is any of real interest, and basically that's just to have a little bit of backstory with these characters. But other than that, the show is irrelevant. So let's hope for next week's episode is going to at least be some kind of exciting. At least I hope for a lot of action in the next week's episode, because what else can they give us? So with that said, I am going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.